The wind was a living entity, a malevolent spirit of the cold. It was born on the high, ice-crowned peaks of the mountains they called the Stone Teeth and howled down the slopes, scouring the landscape with its invisible, freezing claws. For the people of the Red Ochre Cave, a clan of 37 souls, this wind was their oldest and most relentless enemy. Their cave, a deep scar in a rust-colored cliff face, offered shelter from the snow and the rain, but the wind was insidious. It found its way through the smallest gaps, a constant, draining presence that stole the warmth from their bodies and the strength from their spirits. Their primary defense against this enemy was the hide. The skins of the beasts they hunted, deer, wild boar, the occasional great elk, were their blankets, their beds, and their clothing. But this defense was a clumsy and inefficient one. The hides were heavy, stiff, and difficult to manage. They were worn as simple cloaks, draped over the shoulders and tied at the front with a thick, clumsy thong of leather. They were a barrier, yes, but a poor one. The wind would whip under the edges, and any vigorous movement could cause the cloak to shift, exposing the wearer to the full fury of the cold. Running, climbing, even the act of throwing a spear was hampered by the cumbersome, flapping weight of the hide. Elara knew the failings of the hide more intimately than most. She was not a hunter. Her domain was the back of the cave, the area designated for the women's work. It was here that the raw, bloody skins were brought after a successful hunt. It was her task, along with the other women led by the old and stern matriarch, Yona, to prepare them. They would scrape the skins clean of flesh and fat with sharp flint scrapers, a laborious and foul-smelling task. Then, they would stretch them and rub them with animal brains and fat to soften them, pounding them with smooth stones for hours on end. The result was a stiff, tough leather, a material that could turn aside a thorn but offered little in the way of comfort. Elara was younger than the other women, her hands not yet as calloused, her back not yet permanently bowed from the work. But what she lacked in experience, she made up for with an observant and restless mind. She saw problems not as immutable facts of life, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. And the greatest puzzle was the cold. Her younger brother, Leo, was small for his age, a boy of 8 winters with a persistent cough that worsened with every cold snap. Elara would watch him at night, huddled in his stiff deer-hide wrap, shivering so violently that his whole body seemed to vibrate. She would try to wrap him tighter, but the stiff hide would just bunch up, creating new gaps for the cold wind to slither through. Her heart ached with a fierce, protective love and a deep sense of powerlessness. A hunter could fight a boar. A forager could find a hidden patch of winterberries. But how did one fight the wind itself? The problem, Elara reasoned, was in the fastening. The leather thongs they used were too thick. To tie their cloaks, they had to punch crude holes in the hide with a sharp, pointed piece of flint they called an awl. The thong would then be threaded through, but the hole it required was large, and the hide around it would often tear under strain. The connection was clumsy and weak. One day, while mending a torn water skin, an idea began to form. She was using her flint awl to punch new holes to thread a new leather tie. As she pushed the sharp point of the awl through the tough leather, she noticed how cleanly it pierced the material. The hole was small and neat. The problem wasn't the hole. It was the thick thong she had to force through it afterwards. Her gaze fell upon a pile of sinew. This was the long, fibrous tissue taken from the backs and legs of deer. When dried, it became an incredibly strong, thin thread. The men used it to bind their flint spearheads to the wooden shafts. It was prized for its strength and its thinness. What if, she thought, she could use a thin thread of sinew instead of a thick leather thong? But how would she get the flimsy sinew through the tiny hole made by the awl? She couldn't push it through like a stiff thong. Her mind wandered to a memory from the previous summer. She had been sitting in a meadow watching Leo chase grasshoppers. Her arm had brushed against a large thistle bush. Later, she found one of the long, sharp thorns had caught on the fur of her wrap. As she pulled it free, she saw that the thorn had pulled a few strands of fur clean through the weave of her own hair, which she had been resting her arm on. The thorn had acted like a guide, a tiny spear that carried a thread with it. The thorn, The idea struck her with the force of a physical blow. A long, sharp thorn with a way to carry the sinew. Her first experiments were born of this simple observation. She found the longest, sharpest thorn she could and tried to split the blunt end to create a small fork to hold the sinew. It was a clumsy affair, and the thorn broke after only 2 or 3 piercings. She tried different types of wood, whittling them down to a point with a sharp flint flake. They were either too brittle and snapped or too soft and the point would blunt immediately against the tough hide. She needed something stronger, something that was both hard and fine. Her eyes fell on the bone pile. This was the midden at the edge of their camp, a collection of discarded bones from countless meals. Most were large, thick leg bones of deer, which were cracked open for their marrow. But there were other, smaller bones. The delicate, hollow bones of birds, the fine, needle-like bones from the feet of rabbits. She picked up a long, thin bone from a snow goose they had eaten a week prior. It was light, hollow, and surprisingly strong. She spent the rest of the day working on it. Using a sharp-edged piece of flint, she began to scrape. It was painstaking work. She didn't want to nap it, as that would create fracture lines. She had to abrade it to slowly, patiently wear it down. She scraped the bone along its length, narrowing one end into a long, tapering point. She then took it to a large, flat piece of sandstone near the cave entrance and began to grind the point, turning it over and over, making it perfectly smooth and sharp. The result was a fine, sharp spike of bone, more durable than any thorn. But the problem of carrying the thread remained. How could she attach the sinew? Then she remembered her awl. It didn't just make a hole. It was a tool for making holes. She took the smallest, sharpest flint drill she possessed, a tiny, pointed flake of obsidian that was usually used for boring holes in shells for decoration. She placed her new bone spike on a flat piece of wood. Holding the blunt end firmly, she began to carefully, painstakingly drill a hole near the top. She applied a gentle, steady pressure, twisting the flint drill back and forth. Her tongue was caught between her teeth in concentration. The bone dust was fine and white. She felt a slight give, a change in resistance. She blew away the dust. She had done it. She had created a tiny, perfect hole at the end of her bone spike. Her heart hammered in her chest. She took a fine strand of dried sinew and, with some difficulty, threaded it through the eye. She held it up. It was a complete tool. A bone needle and thread. It felt like a magical object, a thing of immense power. She couldn't wait. She found 2 small, soft scraps of rabbit fur that had been deemed too small to be useful. She overlapped their edges and, using her awl to make a starting hole, she pushed her new needle through both pieces of hide. It slid through with a satisfying, smooth resistance. She pulled the sinew tight and made another stitch and then another. She created a seam. It wasn't a clumsy, bunched-up line of knots. It was a neat, flat, and incredibly strong connection that held the 2 pieces of hide together as if they were one. She pulled on the seam, testing its strength. It held firm. This was the answer. This would fight the wind. The next few days, Alara worked in secret. During the day, she performed her usual duties, scraping and pounding hides under the watchful eye of Yona. But at night, when the clan was asleep, she would work by the faint, dying light of the central fire. She made more needles, refining her technique each time. She learned that the leg bones of a rabbit were best for fine work, while the denser bones from a deer's lower leg could be shaped into larger, stronger needles for thicker hides. She began to collect discarded scraps of hide, pieces that were too small or awkwardly shaped to be used for cloaks. She started to piece them together. Her goal was a garment for Leo, not a wrap, but something new, something with shape. Her secret work did not go entirely unnoticed. One night, Yona, woken by a cough, saw Alara hunched by the fire, her hands busy. The old woman walked over, her face a mask of stern disapproval. "What is this foolishness?" Yona's voice was a harsh whisper. "Wasting good sinew on children's games. What are you making with these bone splinters?" Alara, startled, tried to hide her work, but it was too late. Yona picked up one of the finished needles. She examined it, her brow furrowed. She looked at the small, pieced-together scraps of hide. "This is not how things are done," Yona said, her voice firm with the weight of tradition. "Hides are worn as they are given by the beast. You cannot cut them and stitch them like leaves. They will tear. It is weak." "It is not weak, it is strong," Elara insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "And it will be warm. It will have no gaps." Yona snorted in disbelief. "The wind will tear your threads. You waste your time. Go to sleep." She tossed the needle back at Elara and returned to her furs, leaving Elara feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The greatest obstacle, she realized, might not be the technical challenge, but the unyielding rock of tradition. Undeterred, Elara continued her work. She began to envision a new kind of clothing. Instead of a single, large hide, she could use multiple, smaller pieces. This meant she could use the softer, more pliable hide from a deer's belly for the main body, and tougher pieces for the shoulders. She was not just joining hides. She was engineering a garment. She began to shape it to Leo's body. She made 2 large pieces for the front and back, and then, in a stroke of inspiration, she crafted 2 smaller, separate pieces for his arms. Sleeves. It was a revolutionary concept. An arm was not something to be covered by a loose flap, but something to be enclosed. The final garment was unlike anything the clan had ever seen. It was a tunic. It slipped over Leo's head and fitted his small torso snugly. The sleeves enclosed his arms, allowing him to move them freely without creating a single gap for the wind to enter. It was made of a patchwork of soft rabbit and deer hide, its ugliness in the eyes of tradition far outweighed by its ingenuity. She waited for a particularly cold evening, when the wind was howling its mournful song around the mouth of the cave. She called Leo over to the fire and helped him into his new tunic. The boy looked down at himself in wonder. He swung his arms. He twisted his body. The garment moved with him. It was a part of him, a second skin. He sat by the fire, and for the first time on such a night he was not shivering. A faint flush of color returned to his cheeks. He leaned against Elara, a deep, comfortable warmth radiating from his small body. Gorg, the clan leader, a man of few words and much observation, had been watching the entire exchange. He had seen Leo's constant shivering for weeks. He saw him now still and warm. He walked over, his heavy footsteps silencing the low murmur of the cave. He knelt before Leo, a surprising gesture from the great leader. He ran his calloused, powerful hand over the seams of the tunic. He felt the supple texture of the pieced-together hides. He looked at how it fitted the boy's shoulders. He then looked up, his deep-set eyes fixing on Elara. He said nothing, but his gaze was filled with a profound, dawning understanding. He looked at the discarded bone needle lying on a stone next to her. It was a tiny, insignificant thing of bone and flint. But Gorg, in that moment, began to see it not as a splinter, but as a seed from which a new future for his people might grow. He stood up, his gaze still locked on Elara, and in the silence of the cave, broken only by the howling of the wind that could no longer touch the boy, a silent challenge was issued and accepted. The age of the clumsy hide was over. The age of the needle had begun. The morning after Elara had given Leo his tunic, Gorg approached her. He did not speak, but gestured with his head towards the pile of newly prepared hides. Then he pointed to himself. The meaning was unmistakable. "Make one for me." This was the ultimate test. Leo's tunic was a success, but he was a small boy. A garment for Gorg, the clan's largest and most powerful hunter, was another matter entirely. It would need to be strong enough to withstand the rigors of a violent hunt, flexible enough not to impede the drawing of a bow or the throwing of a spear, and warm enough to protect him on a long, cold watch. It was a monumental challenge, and Elara knew that the future of her invention depended on its success. She also knew she could not do it alone. The amount of scraping, cutting, and stitching required for such a large garment was more than one person could manage. She needed help. She approached 2 other young women, Lyra and Fenna. They were her age, and she had seen in them the same quiet patience and careful hands that she possessed. They had watched her work on Leo's tunic with curiosity, not the scorn that Yona had shown. "Gorg has asked for a hunter's tunic," Alara explained, laying out the best pieces of deer hide. "I cannot do it alone. We must work together." Lyra and Fenna looked from the hides to Alara, their eyes wide. To be chosen for the leader's work was a great honor, but also a great risk. If they failed, the shame would be immense. "Yona says it is foolishness," Fenna whispered, casting a nervous glance towards the old matriarch, who was watching them with her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud of disapproval. "Yona is wrong," Alara said with a newfound confidence. "Look at Leo. He is warm. His cough is almost gone. This is the new way. We will be the ones to shape it." Inspired by her conviction, the two women agreed. Alara became a teacher. She showed them how to craft the needles, how to select the right bones, and how to patiently grind them to a sharp, smooth point. She demonstrated the most difficult part, drilling the eye without splitting the bone. Under her guidance, they began to produce their own needles. A small corner of the cave transformed into a workshop, filled with the soft, rhythmic sounds of scraping and grinding. Then came the sewing. Alara showed them the simple running stitch she had invented, and how to knot the sinew securely at the beginning and end of each seam. They began the slow, laborious process of piecing together Gorg's tunic. They became a team, a small circle of innovators working against the weight of tradition. Yona watched their progress with a mixture of anger and resentment. Her authority, built on decades of being the sole expert on the preparation and use of hides, was being challenged by a young woman with a bone splinter. "You cut the hide spirit," Yona declared one afternoon, standing over them. "You weaken it. A hunter's cloak must be a single, strong skin from a single, strong beast. A patchwork of scraps is a patchwork of weakness. It will fail him when he needs it most." "A single skin does not have arms," Alara countered calmly, not looking up from her work. "A single skin has gaps, catches the wind and pulls on the shoulder. This will be a second skin. It will move with him." The creation of Gorg's tunic was a process of discovery. They learned that using the soft, pliable belly hide for the areas under the arms allowed for greater freedom of movement. They learned to stitch a reinforcing patch of tougher neck hide onto the shoulders, where the weight of a spear would rest. They were not just sewing. They were designing. They were tailoring the garment to its function. After more than a week of constant, focused work, the tunic was complete. It was a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering. It was shaped to Gorg's massive torso, with strong, wide shoulders and sleeves that tapered slightly towards the wrist. With a sense of great ceremony, Alara presented it to him in the center of the cave. The entire clan watched. Gorg took the tunic. It looked surprisingly small for something meant to cover him. He slipped it over his head. It settled onto his shoulders perfectly. He moved his arms, twisting and stretching. A look of profound surprise crossed his face. He bent, miming the tracking of an animal. He stood tall and drew back his arm, as if to throw a spear. The tunic moved with him, its seams holding strong, its form flexing with his muscles. There was no pull, no restriction. He then walked to the mouth of the cave, where the cold wind was a constant torrent. He stood there for a long time, facing into the wind. His long hair was whipped back from his face, but his body, encased in its new, sealed skin, was protected. The wind could not find a way in. He turned back to the clan. A slow, rare smile spread across his face. "It is good," he declared, his voice booming through the cave. "This is a hunter's skin. From now on, this is how we will be clothed." He looked directly at Yona. "Alara will teach all the women. The old way is done." The decree was absolute. Yona's face paled. Her authority shattered in a single moment. The quiet revolution was complete. The days that followed were transformative for the people of the Red Ochre Cave. The women's corner was no longer a place of silent, laborious pounding. It became a vibrant workshop. Alara, Lyra, and Fenna were now the teachers, guiding the hands of the other women. They became a collective, a team of artisans who took immense pride in their work. They developed new techniques. A stronger stitch for stress points, a finer stitch for joining soft furs for the lining of a child's vest. The impact on the clan was immediate and profound. Clad in their new, fitted clothing, they were warmer than they had ever been. The nagging coughs and sicknesses that had plagued them through the cold months began to fade. The children, in their small tunics and newly designed hide trousers, could play for longer without becoming dangerously cold. The hunters saw the greatest benefit. They were faster, more agile. They could move through the dense forests without their cloaks snagging on branches. Their arms were free for a quick, unencumbered throw. Their hunts became more successful. The flow of meat and hides into the cave became more reliable. The clan was not just warmer. It was wealthier and better fed. They began to create things they had never imagined before. They sewed bags with shoulder straps to carry foraged foods more easily. They crafted supple hide boots, lined with rabbit fur, that protected their feet from the snow and sharp stones. They even learned to stitch together larger hides to create small, conical shelters that the hunters could carry with them, allowing them to stay out on long hunts for several days. The simple bone needle had changed their entire relationship with their environment. It had given them mastery. Alara's status was transformed. She was no longer just a woman who worked hides. She was an innovator, a teacher. Her name was spoken with a respect equal to that of the best hunters. She had not brought down a great beast with a spear, but she had conquered the wind with a needle, and in doing so, she had secured the future of her people. Yona, her spirit broken, eventually acquiesced. The evidence was undeniable. She took up a needle herself, her old, gnarled fingers clumsy at first, but her lifetime of experience with hides gave her a unique insight. It was she who discovered that rubbing the sinew thread with beeswax made it waterproof and even stronger. In a quiet way, the old and the new found a way to work together, blending tradition with innovation. One evening, as the clan sat around a roaring fire, their bellies full of roasted boar, a sense of profound peace and security filled the cave. Alara sat with Leo, who was now a healthy, robust boy, eagerly showing her a new, sharp flint he had found. She looked around at her people. They were all engaged in some small activity. A man was mending a tear in his tunic with a bone needle. A woman was sewing a small fur pouch. Another was teaching her daughter how to make a seam straight and true. The constant, rhythmic work of the needles had become the new heartbeat of the clan. The thread of the sinew did more than just bind pieces of hide together. It had bound the people closer. The women worked together in a way they never had before, sharing knowledge, creating as a community. The improved clothing and tools benefited everyone, strengthening the clan as a whole. Alara picked up a smooth, polished deer bone and a sharp flint flake. She began to scrape, her hands moving with a familiar, practiced grace. She was crafting a new needle not just for herself, but for the clan. It was a simple tool born of a simple idea. But in its eye, it held the thread of their survival, and in its point, it held the future. The wind still howled outside the red ochre cave, but its tyranny was broken forever, defeated not by brute strength, but by the quiet genius of a needle and thread.